So we're starting by taking a look at these two graphs, and we're looking to see when f is decreasing as our first one. So f, that's going to be this graph here, and so we're just interested in seeing where is that graph going to be decreasing. Well, to look to see where it's decreasing then, it looks like it starts up here at 0 and then it's decreasing through here. So this would be the whole section where our graph is actually decreasing along the way. So then we need to describe that as an interval, because specifically notice it said using interval notation, so we still have to use the intervals there. So for that, we know we're going between 0 and 4. The question is, do we include those? Well, for our first point here at 0, is it decreasing at 0? Well, what is it doing at 0? Well, like, what's its slope at 0? The slope is 0. That means it's not increasing or decreasing. And so it would not be included, and so we use the parenthesis there. All right? Then we got a negative slope all the way down. Negative slope means decreasing. And then we get to the 4, the end point here. Well, at the end point, is it decreasing? It's kind of tricky, actually, to think about this. Because in order to see what's happening there, I'm basically finding out what's happening on either side of that point in order to know if it's decreasing. Because for something to be decreasing, it has to be higher on the left and lower on the right. Well, is it lower on the right? No. Because this is an endpoint down here. There is nothing to the right of that point. And therefore, actually, we do not include that as part of the decreasing. So our interval here for where it's decreasing is just going to be 0 to 4, non-inclusive. On the same set of graphs, please now state what's the domain and what's the range for the same graph, that is graph f. All right, so to find our domain, first of all, remember domain is dealing with our x values. So that basically is going to say that our graph is going from here, which is at -4, to here, which is at a +4. So our domain is -4 to 4. Now, are those supposed to be brackets or parentheses? Well, for domain, it's a question of, is this point included? And I'll tell you, the book is a little bit poor at this particular aspect, and this graphic is directly from the book, getting you used to it. Technically speaking, if we want to be very precise, we would put a solid dot at the end of that. But generally speaking, when you look at the graphics in the book, if there is no dot, they are assuming that it is a solid dot. If there's an empty dot, then they'll actually draw it in. But if there's nothing, assume it's solid. So that means that it would be included, and so we are going to include both endpoints of that into our domain. And notice we do include them here, but not in the increasing, decreasing kind of thing, because we're just looking to see if there's a point there, not what's happening next to it as well. All right, then for the range, our range in this case, we're going from this over here, which is at -2, up to this up here, which is up at a +3. So we're going from -2 up to a +3. And again, there's no dot there, so we assume that it's inclusive. So that one's included. And up at the 3, does it actually hit 3 based on as far as we can tell? Looks like it to me, so yes. And so there's our domain and range for f. Just to make sure you got the whole routine down, please state the domain and the range for g. And if you have to estimate a little bit, just be as accurate as you can. All right, so then for g, we want to state the domain and range. The domain, well, it's going from here to here on our x's. So that looks like it's going to be going from -4 up to a +3. Should those be Parentheses or brackets? Brackets, yes, because brackets mean that we include it, and yes, they are included here. So that's our domain. For the range now. The range in this particular case requires a little bit more careful looking though, doesn't it? So for the lowest part of our range, where we're looking to see just how low this graph goes, notice it goes down to here. We're just going to have to estimate about where that is. And it goes up to here. Notice what was not a factor at all in terms of our range. This point right here, it didn't change anything with the range. It just happens to be sitting kind of in the middle of our range because our graph goes down and then it goes. Now for our range, I'm going to assume that that point down here is right around a half. So I use 0.5. If you estimated it as something slightly different, that's okay as long as it's close to that. And so we get a range of 0.5 up to 4, inclusive. All right, so then having done those, let's go back now to the work like you were doing with your groups at the start of class. Here is a function. I'd like you please to write the expression that represents this function. In other words, write another piecewise function for this one. Now to make sure you're on the right track, here is the equation for that leftmost part of our piecewise function, negative 3/2 x minus 3. All right, we then go and we tackle the middle section, which is a circle. So we're going to be using this formula up here. That's our general formula. But again, like the last problem we saw that used a circle, h and k are both 0 because our circle is centered at 0, 0. So it's just going to be x squared plus y squared equals the radius squared, which radius is 2 here. So 2 squared is 4. Solve that for y. And if we solve that for y, we get y equals plus or minus the square root of negative x squared plus 4. Now in this case, do we need the plus or minus? No, we don't, because we're only dealing with half the circle. Which half do we want to be left behind, the positive or the negative? The positive, yes. So I can actually just get rid of the plus or minus entirely. And so that's our equation for the y equals. And then once we have that, then we can go ahead and get the equation of our last piece over here. So 3/2 x minus 3 again. And then, now that we know the equation of each of those pieces, we put them together into our piecewise notation. And then we're just missing one thing here. Our domains that we're actually using for each of those pieces. So, for each one, we're going to -2 or 2 as a border. Because the circle would be vertical at those 2 points, I'm going to choose to not use the circle's points there. I'm going to just use the line's points there. And so this would be my answer. And again, I did it using the inequality notation because that's the way the book's going to do it. However, if you used if you used interval notation here, that would be perfectly fine.